Historians don't often make research posters, but I have, and shown them in big scientific uh, things. And so what I did and what I do in my role as the coordinator for undergraduate research is that I do speak mostly to and for undergraduate students. And so if I've pitched this just a little bit lower than where you think that you're at, that's okay, because you know what, there's always something new for all of us to learn. And so thanks very much for inviting me to come today, and I'm going to get right on it. So how to make a research poster, and things to think about to make your research poster a little bit better and to stand out. As a settler Canadian of Scottish, Irish, Norwegian, Swedish, and Ukrainian tradition, I am filled with gratitude to live within Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. I give respect to the First Nations and Métis of this place and continually value our interconnectedness through Wekutuwin. I too love this land of vast skies and tall trees, Saskatoons and blueberries, and the swift and slow waters of the Saskatchewan River. You'll notice that that one's not quite the same as the normal USask approved one. That's because I was very privileged to go through with the Guanama Center and develop my own land acknowledgement. And if ever you get a chance to do so, it's an afternoon well worth your time. So my first question, and maybe you guys can put it in the chat, have you ever created a research poster before? And I'm happy for you guys to pop that into the chat. Yes, Nicole, yes, thank you. It's an interesting process to do a research poster. One of the biggest things is of course, to which part of your research you're going to talk about. So many posters. Daryl has done so many. Hopefully, you'll be like everyone else, that you get better at it as you go along. But again, it just depends on how things are going. But research posters, of course, are one of the ways that we as academics spread our knowledge, especially in person or on online presentations. And research posters are an interesting beast all their own. But these are the things that I wanted to break down and have you think about after today. And it might change the way that you do research posters. First of all, the context. I know these are out of order. That's kind of on purpose. It tends to shake up my mind a little bit. Context really matters. So really thinking about why we did the research. Who the audience is, that matters. And then the one big thing, and the reason why that came up first is that is actually the biggest thing that I want you to get out of today, is the one big thing. If the audience came to your poster session and they walked away and they thought about it the next day, what's the one thing that you want them to remember about your poster? That's why it showed up first, even though it was out of line in the context. Language, plain language. You will win more converts to what you're studying and what you're showcasing, the plainer the language that you use. Writing is thinking. This is kind of my own little bugaboo, but I'm going to talk about that and how the process of actually writing your poster is part of your analytical process. Good visuals, how and why they matter. Some design tips. We have a few design tips for you. And then how to present with poise. These are some of the things that we're going to cover today. But again, you'll notice that the one big thing popped up first, and that was on purpose. So, why are you creating a poster? What's the context? That's one of the first things to think about and to remember when you're sitting down to write a poster. What are some of the reasons why you might be writing a poster? And for students at the university, sometimes it's for a class and to be marked. There's a number of poster sessions that happen across campus, and if you're going to be marked, then of course you've got to pay attention to the rubric, whatever the professor asked you to do. But most of the time when we're making a poster, it's because we're going to a conference, and they could be a USask conference like the upcoming USSU Symposium, might be a national conference or a regional conference, an international conference, whatever it is, and to present research. And it might be, the other thing to think about is who's at that conference, and we'll talk about audience a little bit. This is the first thing to think about. Which is more important, how smart you sound or how much your audience understands? And when I give this presentation or a similar sort of thing to undergraduate students, for the most part, they're like, how smart I sound, that's what matters the most. And I get that, I really do, as a student myself. But really, the key is how much your audience understands. This is by far the more important aspect of it, because the thing about a poster is that you want your audience to get as much as they can hold in their mind, as quickly as they can, and as clearly as they can. Because if they understand your one big point, one or two big things that you really want them to remember, and you get that across as clearly as you can, they'll remember it. And that's what you're aiming for. So what is a research poster? Of course, these days, a lot of our poster conferences have been online for the past 2 years. So of course, we've got the image on the left, and then of course the image on the right. That's one of the undergraduate research poster symposiums that my office runs. That's actually in the President's building, so the head administration building at the top of the bowl. And that's a picture that I took from a couple of years ago, 2019. So research posters. So this is kind of what they look like when they're built up really, really big. The minute you put them on a small computer, then that changes the dynamic. So something to think about as well. So this is about what a research poster is and what it's not. It is absolutely a visual presentation. It's a very visual medium. People rarely stand in front of a poster and read every word. In fact, if you make it too hard for them to do that, they won't. They'll glide right on by. Think about it as an advertisement for your work. It's an advertisement and an enticement to have a conversation. They're short, really short, and we're going to talk about how short they are. Your one big thing, and this is something that we're going to come back to and we're going to talk about it a bit more, but you need to really... You can't talk about all of your research. You need to slice your research very, very thin or very slim and focus on one particular thing. And when you do that, your poster is going to shine much, much better. If you try, the more information you try and shove on your poster, the worse it's going to be. It's a visual advertisement that helps you explain your story. So when you're walking past in a hallway and there's a poster just standing there and you're going to stop and read the whole thing, chances are you're not going to. But if the person who created that poster was standing there, then that is your invitation to have a conversation, and they'll use the poster to explain what it is that they did. And the process of creating a poster is actually an analytical tool. So if you're being asked to produce a poster that's drawing on your research, I tell people to actually, even if you don't have to give one, actually go through the process of creating a poster about your research, because it will help you to understand it better. Sorry about the phone ringing in my house. What it's not your whole essay or your whole research journal article put on one big piece of paper. It's not. It's absolutely not that. It's also not a bunch of small graphics that no one can see or understand. We've all seen posters where the graphics are so small or you don't actually know what they mean. So we try very hard not to do that. It's also not just your results. This is a logical fallacy that I've seen quite often. It's not just your results. It can be about the question that you asked and why you asked it, so your context. It could be about your process.
That would be nice if we could do that, like get a technical idea of what people will be like.
We keep getting kicked out.
Sorry, I'll get them to stop talking.
Sorry. That's okay. It can be about your question, your process. It can be about your methods. That's something that's really quite interesting. Actually, you might have developed a whole brand new method for what you're doing, and maybe you've even created a whole new machine that actually calculates or measures something, and your results. Generally, with your poster, you want to focus on just one of those. I'm going backwards instead of forwards. Generally in your poster you want to focus on one, and then you can make the choice on which you focus on. And I don't mean focus to the exclusion of everything else, but maybe there's one aspect of what you've done that you just want to highlight just a little bit more. And it's not just written up at the end of a project. That goes back to what I said about the process of creating a poster. It's an analytical tool. It's part of the project the whole way along. The more analysis and the more writing you do as you're doing your research, the better your research is going to be. So first off, of course, is your audience. So what do you want to say? Which is more important? What you want to say, or what does your audience want to know? I would imagine this is fairly self-explanatory, but sometimes it's hard to figure it out because we want to focus on what we want to say. We've got really cool things and I want to tell you about this. But what does your audience really want to know? That's actually where you need to be. Think about your audience. So if you are presenting to a really, really big conference where there's going to be scientists from all different backgrounds, not just in your little teeny niche area, then you need to pitch it to that wider audience and think about what that audience wants to know. If you're pitching it to your lab mates and you've got a poster that only your lab mates who are working on the same area that you are, and they know what you've been working on, or they're very, very up to date on the most recent methodologies in your particular area, then you might want to get down into the weeds a little bit more and get really, really technical. So depending on your audience, that will matter in terms of what you're going to put into your poster. So that's one of the reasons why it's hard to build just one poster, because if you want to just build one poster and print one poster and take it to multiple different conferences or symposiums, you'll probably end up at a conference where your poster is pitched to the wrong audience. So that's a tough one. If you can get away with printing more than one or making more than one version of your poster, depending on your audience, your research will be able to touch and speak to more people. So does audience change a poster? Absolutely it does. So if you've got a poster for your class, what does your syllabus say? If it's an in-person event, how appealing is your poster? Will people stop? They need to talk to you, so you might want to adjust your visuals if you know that you're going to be standing next to your poster. If it's for online, make sure that your font isn't too small. Can people still read it? Is it too small? These are all things to think about as well. So does your audience and how you're presenting it, how does that change a poster? And in all cases, who's listening? So again, that audience. Are you being marked? Are you being judged? Is there a rubric? Who's listening to you? Who's reading your poster? That all changes what you choose to put into the poster. And of course, are there prizes? That matters too. I ask people to think about this. Why are you doing this work? You know, sometimes it's too easy to jump into the weeds, but let's say that you're doing some really technical research work, but the goal is to help people who have multiple sclerosis. Then that's actually where you start. The larger goal is that you want to help solve or provide more research that gets us further to finding a cure for multiple sclerosis. Don't get caught in the weeds about some little tiny minor molecule that you're working on. Start with the big picture. How does this research resonate with you? My sister has multiple sclerosis. That's why I do this research. My dad died of cancer. That's why I do this research. Your personal journey actually does matter, and your audience is interested in knowing that. So if you can have a slide that talks about that, I do recommend it. Here's where we're going to break down one big thing. What's the one big thing you want people to know? And there's kind of 4 sort of areas that your one big thing could be. It could be theory. It could be that, let's say that you're in philosophy or political studies or something like that. You're all in medicine, but just depending on what your audience is, it might be that you're breaking new ground around a particular theory of something that we do in medicine. And so that could be your one big thing. It could be your methods. That's something else that people will often forget about, or they'll think that that's just a technical part. But sometimes you are doing groundbreaking methods, either in quantitative research or qualitative research. If you're using groundbreaking methods and that matters and it makes a difference to how you set your question and what your results are, then by all means talk about your methods and be sure to highlight that, and especially if that's what you want people to know about. Maybe you built a whole new machine for measuring something. By all means, your methodology matters. Of course, your results, most of us end up in that area, so that black area is the biggest. So it's not on this page, but it would be. Usually that's where most of us end up spending the most of our time as results. But you in medicine, actually, sometimes your research actually comes up with an intervention. You know, everybody needs to eat 10 goji berries every day and you'll never get cancer. You realize I made that up, but still, like some kind of an intervention. This will happen in health sciences and medicine, and also in veterinary medicine far more often than everywhere else. So I wanted to make sure that I highlighted that here, because it could be that your research results in an intervention that you want everyone to know about. So think about your one big thing, and these are 4 areas, 4 ways that you can potentially bring it down, sort of break it out to highlight what it is about your research that really makes it stand out and that you really want people to remember. Another thing that often happens is the concept of plain language. We have at the universities this idea that plain language is somehow writing down or dumbing things down, but it's not. Plain language is stronger and not weaker than academic language. It makes your academic writing better as well. I generally write for a public audience, and so this is something that I work on a lot. But think about the papers that get the most references. 1,000 references, 10,000 references. These are the top level papers, and think about why they're the top level papers. Often it's because you read it and you understood what their point was the first time you read it. It was easy to understand. It was convincing. You believed it. You think that they were on the right path. You incorporated it into your work. You've referenced it. They carved out a new path. Oftentimes, those papers were written in very plain language that everyone could understand the first time they read it. Second thing to remember is that, of course, the language that you choose to write in might not be everyone's first language. So the plainer and more succinct and clear you can write, the better it is for your entire audience to understand you the first time that they read what you've done. And that includes on a poster. So plain language is your friend, and it will make all of your writing better. This is my little where I stand. This is my line in the sand. Writing itself is an analytical tool. All too often, particularly in the sciences, I've noticed, they'll talk about the whole research process and then you write it up at the end as if that's something that just happens in the last 4 or 6 weeks of your research. But it's not. Writing is actually an analytical tool in and of itself. And so when you write all the way along, you interact with what you've done and you keep your lab notes and you keep your notes from anything that you've read for your literature review. And writing becomes an analytical tool, and oftentimes when we write a poster, we write it too long and then we have to cut. But a whole poster, and we're going to come back to this, is no more than 250 or 300 words, so that's 1 page. So you are telling your whole story in 1 page of a Word document. And writing is really this active where you figure out what you did, why you did it, you explain it to yourself. So it's about your questioning. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Whose work do you want to criticize? You can criticize yourself. You can reflect and analyze. You connect a whole bunch of things, and you find your problems and gaps. Writing is very much an analytical tool. Another thing that people, when it comes to posters, is that make sure that you're really clear on what stage of research you're at. You can do a poster when you're just at the literature review stage. It's absolutely acceptable, and you can do that. You can do a poster at any stage of your research as long as you're really clear on where you're at. But it becomes part, like I said, writing is very much an analytical tool because we write to discover and to understand. That's what we write for. We discover it for ourselves and understand it for ourselves so that we can explain it to someone else. And here's Albert Einstein. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And I love that quote because I'll throw it at my husband, who's an agronomist, and so he's an expert in growing crops. And I'm like, yeah, I don't understand what you just said. So then he'll break it down, and then we'll get to the actual core of what he wants to tell me. Another thing that we do, again, particularly in the sciences, I notice this, is that we assume that writing happens at the end, that the research is the big part and writing is at the end. But when you're writing, or when you're going to create a poster, start writing as soon as you start your researching, because it takes a long time to write a clear, short, and excellent poster. It takes a lot of iterations. It takes a lot of editing. So the sooner you start it, the better. You need to give yourself time. There are writing retreats. I don't know if the College of Medicine has them, but the University Library hosts writing retreats, and there are graduate level writing retreats, but all students at the U of S can go, and actually I've seen both faculty and staff at those writing retreats as well. That focused writing time is actually a really good thing. Take advantage of it if you can. And then edit, of course. My favorite way to proofread is actually to read it out loud. So I do that for everything I write. All 4 books that I've written, I read every word out loud, and it does make a difference. You'd be surprised how much stuff you'll catch when you read it out loud. So high recommend for that as a tool. When you're doing a poster, of course, you need to plan it out. So you need to figure out, well, what do I want to put on this poster? And then I've even seen people use Post-it notes or hand sketch, or just get a great big piece of poster paper and just kind of, sketch it out and figure out what they're going to put where. And you also need to gather your visuals, which is what we're going to talk about next, because good visual design really, really matters. This is what sets the good posters apart from the less good posters. So on the left, you'll see there's a real lack of consistency. There's different fonts, there's white on black, there's black on white. It's all over the map. So there's no visual style. So you want to aim for a more unified look. So that's something to really think about when you're building a poster. It's harder to do if you're using other people's graphs, charts, and so on and so forth. So if you can, try and make your own graphics, your own charts, your own diagrams. You can, if you want to use someone else's research work, but then just turn around and build their research work into a new one so that it fits well with your own, the consistency of your look, then by all means you can do that, and you can still reference that. Me as a historian, I use a lot of pictures and images. Of course, in every case, and it doesn't matter if it's a chart or a graph or an image, if you're using someone else's, you have to have credit. So make sure that you put that credit right onto the poster and where you got that from. So this comes from Library and Archives Canada. It's a poster. There are still words. So yes, images are great and you want to use as many of them as you can, but here's some recommendations on text sizes. 85 point for the title, and then captions down to 18 points. I've seen smaller. I've seen it even down, especially if someone wants to put references on, they make those really, really small. But there are other ways to do that as well, so we'll talk about that. Font choices. So again, this makes a difference. On the left are serif fonts. So those are the ones that are easier to read and print. So your text, like any blocks of text that you might have, make sure you choose a serif font. So that's got a little bit of a sort of a curly Q on the end, right? You see that? And then sans serif font is what you would use for headings, or if you're going to do a presentation like I'm doing online. So those are the ones that don't have the little curly Qs, in case you don't know. I had to learn that. And I do recommend it, knowing that it does make a difference, because the easier you make it on someone's eyes, the easier it's going to be for them to read what you've written. Okay, so you've got your content, you figured it out, you did a bit of planning, you've gathered your images, you've gathered or you've built your graphs and your charts, you're kind of ready to actually build your poster. Make sure you give yourself time for this, because not everybody is that good with poster building, and it'll take more time than you think for fiddly little things. So make sure that you've got time. But what we're going to do now is that I'm going to put a few posters up, and I want you to put into the chat what you like and what you don't like about each of these posters. Anything that you like and don't like about this big orange blob in front of you. Orange is pretty bright, the font is tiny, the pictures are too small. Yeah, the part about the pictures being too small could be a problem just because of the size of your computer and mine, but I agree. Even if you blew this up into a poster, it's pretty hard to see all those pictures. So curating the pictures down quite a bit. Can you read the white on the yellow? Too much writing, yeah. Orange is pretty bright, too much writing. Yeah, no, it is really, really hard to see. Let's take a look at the next one. Yep. What do you like and not like about this poster? Too busy. The font is very tiny. I have a little bit of trouble with the background. I mean, I get that it's in space, and that's great. It sort of serves the visual image, but it causes a bit of a problem. A couple of other things is all the boxes. You'll notice that they're a little bit haphazard all over the place. You don't know what you're supposed to read first or next, so that's a problem. How about this one? Anything you like, anything you don't like about it? It is very hard to read. It says, if you can read this, you must be nocturnal. Well, that's a good play on words, but if I can't read it, then I really can't read it. It's like, do you want me to read this or not? Like, that's my question. Yes, it is very, very difficult to read. How about this one? I like the boxes and the white space in between. It looks organized. Yeah, there's definitely more white space, which is good, and we're going to talk about how much white space you actually need. It's numbered, so you know where you're going to go next and what you should be looking at and reading next, so that's got some positives to it. It's a little bit problematic for flow. If you have to number your boxes, that can be a little bit of a problem. But yes, it doesn't scare you. Each one's broken down, you can read each one, so you can choose which ones to read, and away it goes. So this one's pretty good. How about this one? There's some interesting things going on with this one. I like that the font is quite a bit larger, and you've got some definite conclusion, which is good. So even if all you did was just read about snook, that's a fish, growth and habitats, and then you read the conclusion, that might be your one big thing. The font describing the graph is large enough. I love the bullet points and the nice pictures. Even the font describing the graphs, yeah, it's large enough. So imagine standing 5 feet away from this poster, you can still read everything, which is really, really important. If you go on the internet and type in research posters, you're going to find tons and tons and tons of examples. Here's one that they've already gone through and showcased all of the things where it's like too small, too much, text dissolves into boring gray, things are crammed. So it points out lots of problems. But there's quite a few places online where you can find some great examples of research posters and some really bad examples. And the reason why that matters is that if you see what works really well, and you can see this is tips for designing effective presentations, and it's built in poster format. You can see there's 3 sort of main columns and broken into 6. You can kind of follow it all the way through. I realize it's blown up, so it's a little bit fuzzy, but that's okay. Even if you were going to read just the bottom right, viewers reading this line demonstrate the poster's success. Yeah, so if that's your one big point, the one thing that you want everyone to remember, you've made it nice and big and easy to find. So there's some, even though this poster is about design, it gives you some good ideas. I'm not gonna click on it, but there's a guy by the name of Mike Morrison who's been really working on better posters, better research posters. I absolutely recommend that you view his video. It gives some really, really great design and idea tips, and the reason why we need to make academic posters better and easier to read. He's a bit on a mission and a bit of a campaign, but Mike Morrison, Better Posters, check it out. Software. So things to use, usually Microsoft PowerPoint. USask has templates, so there's a channel on Pause called Marketing and Communications, and if you go on there, there are poster templates, and you can take one of those and use it. Both Adobe Illustrator and Adobe InDesign have quite a few. YouTube is absolutely your friend to learn how to use any of these, or to learn how to use Microsoft PowerPoint. Even better, there are a huge number of presentations out there to give you the technical aspects of Microsoft PowerPoint or any of the others, and to use them to make posters. So I recommend there. There's also lots of templates, including the ones at USask that I said are on pause, but there are a whole bunch of other templates online as well. So Google is completely your friend. By all means, if you're in a rush, find a template that you like, and there's lots of free ones out there, and then just build your poster. So if you don't want to build it from scratch, don't be scared. There's lots of templates out there. White space is the most important thing on your poster. It helps your poster breathe, and it helps your poster sing. Filling up every inch will freak people out. They will walk past your poster as fast as they can. If there's white space, they feel like they can breathe. So white space is important, and I'll tell you what the percentages are. So here are the rules. And these, you can stretch these to a certain extent, but these are the rules. No more than 250 to 300 words on the whole poster. So everything that you want to put on the poster, put it on one page of a Word document, 12-point font, and that will get you about 250 words, and then you'll know what you need to cut. 20% text, 40% figures, and 40% white space. Almost half, just under half of your poster should be white space. That's one rule I recommend you do not break. Simple, consistent color scheme. If you've got a whole bunch of different colors, you're going to confuse people's eyes, and they're not going to want to look at your poster. So keep it consistent. Keep your design very. So if you can make all of your own graphs and charts, make sure that they're all in the same color scheme. Make them in the same program. That helps. If you're going to put any graphs, images, figures, or pictures, make sure they are as high a resolution as you can. You don't want them to get pixelated out and not be able to read. I also don't like all those posters that had background pictures or gradients behind the text. It makes it really hard to read. So it looks pretty, but it makes your poster hard to read, and you do need to do both. Information, at least in Western society, tends to flow left to right and top to bottom. So build your poster that way. Don't send them on a hunting trip to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. Simple words are the most powerful. Write it so your mom can understand it, or your grandma, or your aunt, or your sister who's not in university. That helps. Simple words. I do recommend that once you've got your poster together and you think you're pretty good with it, send it to the Writing Center. The Writing Center at the University of Saskatchewan Library they have lots and lots of people who volunteer at the Writing Center, and they'll match a tutor to your project, and it's free for all USask students. If you can send it to them and accept their editorial direction or their comments, they'll make your poster that much better. They're very good at this, and they have a really, really fast turnaround time. They also have lots of online resources for just constructing your arguments, organizing, making sure that you're doing a good job. If you're concerned about your grammar and punctuation, then there's some online tutoring around that as well. So if that helps, by all means, take advantage of what USask has to offer. Plagiarism, of course, and citations. Make sure that you only use what you're allowed to use. Make sure you're actually citing everything that you put on your poster. Make sure if you're using an image that it's Creative Commons, or that you put the reference. We have a bit of leeway as academics in that you can put something on from someone's research production or research journal article or whatever it is, as long as you cite it and reference it because you're presenting within an academic setting, then a reference will do. It doesn't have to be Creative Commons. Do be careful though, if you're presenting at a conference where your poster is going to be online, just ask the organizers to see if it's actually available, if it's going to be widely available on the internet. If anybody can find your poster, then that is actually considered a publication. And your supervisor might not want you to do that. So make sure that you ask, because posters are generally non-peer reviewed. The peer review process comes in the poster competition or putting your poster into a conference. And so just be really, really cautious. Sometimes a physical poster at a conference is not considered a publication, whereas if it goes on the internet, it might be. So just kind of figure that out where you're at on that one. There are mechanics, of course, printing or online presenting. It does make a difference. If you're presenting your poster online, if you have the ability to actually break your poster down and put it into a PowerPoint so that you can cover each section in a PowerPoint, you'll actually do a lot better than just having the whole poster on and trying to talk to the whole poster. Because if someone's on the other side and they're just looking at your poster on their laptop, it's really small and they can't actually see it. So if you have the ability to break it down into a PowerPoint, I would recommend that you do so. But if you are printing it, then either way, know the guidelines and stay within the rules. So ask about how big you can print your poster. Can it be landscape or portrait? What do they need at the printing shop? Do they need it as a JPEG, or do they need it as a high resolution image, or are they good with you just sending it to them as a PDF? When do you need to submit it by? How are they going to share it? Again, going back to that concept of, is it published online or not, and what the deadlines are. So know your guidelines. That really, really matters. And the more on top you are of your deadlines and the requirements, the easier it's going to be for the organizers on their end. And the last thing about a poster is the one piece that we often forget, because we think of a poster as this sort of written document with lots of visuals and it gets printed and there it is. But actually, this is your tool. Your poster is your tool to sell your research to other people and explain your research to other people. So you are part of your poster because you need to present it. So to present with poise, here's some thoughts on that. Do this, absolutely do this. Go into the bathroom and do the power pose. Put your shoulders back, put your hands on your hips. I 100% recommend this. I do this every time I'm going to present. It gives your body confidence. It gives your voice a lot of strength and energy. I do this before a job interview. I do this often, and high recommendation for the power pose. And it's by Amy Cuddy. But yeah, just the Wonder Woman power pose, because it will instill all kinds of confidence and strength and energy into your body. So do that first before you go into your, especially if you're nervous, it really helps. When you're presenting, it is a good idea to prepare an oral presentation, and to prepare an oral presentation and to practice it online. High recommendation for that. Usually, you get about 3 minutes. That's about as much time as an audience will give you, and sometimes you can enter those 3-minute thesis competitions, and those are really, really good. So prepare and practice an oral presentation to go along with your poster. You want to introduce yourself and your team and your funding. That's really, really important as well. Don't forget. So make sure you introduce yourself. It's something, especially when we're online, people actually forget to introduce themselves. And so that's something to remember. I always start with the purpose of your research. Why did you do it? It just takes a sentence, but it really settles your audience and it settles you and it reminds you why you did this research and why it matters. I do write out my presentation and practice it beforehand. It just helps. It helps give me a bit of a guideline. I'll try and memorize it, but I still just want to make sure that I don't miss any of the high points. Oral presentations are absolutely not the same as academic writing. An oral presentation is usually done in the first person. I did this, we did that, next we did. It's different from academic writing, which tends to be in the third person. So do keep that in mind. Your oral presentation is coming from you in your voice. It's absolutely first person in simple words. Don't forget to hit your highlights and your one big thing. In your 3 minutes, which is all the attention that you have to assume you might get if you're lucky and someone stops at your poster, remember to really push your highlights and your one big thing. Another thing that people really like to hear is especially if they ask any questions, tell them what you would do differently next time or what you'd like to research next, how you would take this research further. That's something that people would very much like to know, especially if you're in some kind of a poster competition or let's say a doctor or a scientist that you really admire is standing in front of your poster. If you tell them what you would do differently next time or where you'd like to take your research next, they're going to really respect you for that. And then thank them for their time and invite questions and build that conversation. And this can happen even online as well. And thankfully, that is the time to have that deeper conversation and pull things out. If you're presenting in person, there's a few neat ideas. So I've seen people successfully put a QR code. Let's say that your research is online or it's someplace where, like a link to the lab that you worked at. So a QR code that they can just take a picture of and go straight to the lab that you've been working in. That's a really good thing. Some people will bring a laptop or an iPad to a poster presentation. Maybe there's something about your research that you've put into a little quick video that you want to show them. By all means, you can have that there. Some people have handouts, which is perfectly fine. And if you've built some kind of a model, sometimes I've seen this quite often in engineering and ag bio, that they'll bring a model of whatever it is that they were working on so that people can actually see and hold what they did. And these are optional, but some interesting extras that you can consider. And then, of course, you never want to share your work just once. If you can share it, you're leveraging all the same work and showcasing it more than once. So other ways to share your work at USask are the SURE Symposiums. That stands for the Student Undergraduate Research Experience. It's a program that I run. The USSU Symposium, which is coming up in a week and a half. And that's another option. You've missed the deadline for this year, but if you're still around next year, they host it again in the spring. USurge is the University of Saskatchewan Undergraduate Research Journal, and you could submit you can turn your poster into a whole presentation and write a journal article, but you can also submit it as a research snapshot and just submit your poster. So that's a possibility as well. And of course, disciplinary conferences. So make sure that you take your posters to more than one disciplinary conference. Try and make sure that you're hitting a similar audience so that you don't have to change your poster or change the content of your poster a lot. And final thoughts, again, if you're really interested in sort of honing your undergraduate research skills, then a program that I run is the Student Undergraduate Research Experience. So we do a lot of work with students to help them really hone their research skills. And on the right, just to remember to recycle your work and to continue to share it. So, when you go home at Thanksgiving, tell your grandma about it. When you have done a big research project, make sure that you're submitting it to more than one place. And that is the end of my presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and if anyone has any questions, then we're good. How many times do you recommend practicing your presentation before the talk? I would do it probably 3-4 times. It'll feel a bit weird. I think
with the research presentation too, it's really important to, if you can track down your supervisor to make sure you go through it with them.
Oh, absolutely. And yes, good point. I guess one of the things, and I should probably add that in, I was thinking about this from a class perspective, but yes, if you're doing research with a professor, chances are you're never going to present this poster without them having a lot of say and a lot of feedback. And when you're going through the editing process or even the conceptual process and trying to figure out which part of your research you want to put into a poster, your supervisor is your #1 person to talk to about that.
And a lot of these things about, and this was excellent talk, by the way, and very engaging. The way you speak about these things is very good. Thank you. I think what we've done with our presentations with our residents is they get, you meet with your supervisor first, you make sure you've got the information right, and they'll probably have tips on the presentation, but then presenting it to your peers.
Yep.
Before you get it on there, so that you get it to a wider audience, like as many test screenings as you can, right? Before you, and ideally not people just in your lab, but people that maybe aren't familiar with the work.
In fact, I would highly recommend that. Like, yes, absolutely present it to your lab, but the thing is that people in your lab will fill in your gaps, and they might not even notice them.
And they won't even know they're doing it. That's right.
And so, but if you've got a group of friends and you're all presenting, then get together with that group of friends, bring some beer and pizza, and everybody present to each other as a practice run. It's a huge, huge way forward, because your friends will tell you, yeah, I didn't get that. What was the point of you lost me here, you know, so that's an important feedback loop as well.
I just had another question, Merle. I've seen a lot of posters where they'll have, you know, like they'll have a cute little kitty on there, you know, and that photo sort of draws you to the whole poster. Is that something you recommend, or do you think you should save that valuable space for something else?
I would. I mean, there's probably some kind of cute image, you know, from your own research or something that, but yeah, like just putting a random cat or something in, it's not actually going to draw them in because they're going to assume that you're going to be talking about cats, and then you're
Yeah,
not,
I remember
and you're
seeing
disappointing.
I mean it was a presentation, it wasn't a poster, but like literally every slide this guy had like little, you know, flashing things in the corner and you know, and it was very distracting, and I think it got away from you want to keep things on topic, right? Not just try to catch the eye. Um, okay, well, does anybody have any more questions? Otherwise, we'll probably let Dr. Massey go. Thank you very much
Thanks for inviting me. I'm sorry if I went too long. I get
No,
pretty
no,
excited.
no, it was perfect, perfect.
Okay.
Exactly
Take
right.
care.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Bye, everyone.